بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب زدني علما.
No authority of the world can wipe out this Ummah from the face of the earth. Now, it's a very interesting virtue, which I would be explaining in detail, inshallah. Previous nations were persecuted by their enemies. They were oppressed in a manner that they could not make a comeback. There are many nations whose souvenirs are only found in the pages of history. Some of these nations' souvenirs stories couldn't be provided even by history. But Ummat Muhammadiyah was saved from these trials and tribulations. Many communists tried to fulfill this mission, but Allah failed them. Mongols killed Muslims of Baghdad in terms of millions. Mongols. It's a very interesting point here. Mongols killed Muslims in Baghdad in terms of millions. You know what happened actually in Baghdad? How many of you follow the story? No, you might be wondering that why is this important? You need to understand, my friend, the sack of the fall of Baghdad actually marked the end of an era. It was like the final note signaling the downfall of the Abbasid Khilafah. And it actually sent shockwaves through the Islamic world. The Prophet ﷺ, after the Prophet ﷺ, Khulafa al-Rashidin, then you have Banu Umayyah, then Banu Abbas. Banu Abbas actually ruled for a very long time. The Mongols' conquest reshaped the political landscape of the region, and the decline of Islamic civilization began to set in. It was a turning point in Islamic history. Still, you feel the effects of that today. The fall of Baghdad is the entry of Mongols led by Halaku Khan, who was the ruler of Khanate, Persia, and Baghdad was the capital of Abbasid Khilafah. Now, just imagine, according to George Saliba, he said that Mongols entered the greatest city at that time, referring to Baghdad, because Baghdad was often referred as Darus Salam by the caliphs of that time. The Mongols entered the greatest city at that time and left it as a desert. And the fall of Baghdad was for many reasons. The first reason was Mongol expansion, because Mongols under Genghis Khan and successor had been expanding their empire across Asia, utilizing their highly mobile cavalry, their armies, their military strategies. The second was the weakness of the Abbasid Khilafah. By the mid-13th century, what happened? They had capital in Baghdad, but there were internal strife, political fragmentation, weak in military made. The military was so weak that the city was vulnerable to external threats. You have siege tactics. The Mongols employed very effective siege tactics, including use of catapults and other siege engines. The fourth one is betrayal and defection. There was a lot of betrayal from inside, local rulers and factions. Then you have brutal conquest. Now, before getting into that details, even, you just imagine the many heritage movements were destroyed, such as, the Baitul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom Academy. Many scientists, that was actually the House of Wisdom. This Baitul Hikmah was started by Banu Abbasiyah in the mid-8th century. And it brought together into a single system all of the known knowledge of the day. Nearly all of this knowledge was translated in Arabic and was disseminated widely across the entire Islamic empire. Now, just imagine. Now, I would just like to give you a brief idea that how did it impact. The fall of Baghdad into the hands of the Mongols was not just the collapse of a great city or the collapse of a capital of a country. No. It was the collapse of that symbolic sign, which was, long as it remained, acted as a means of honor for Muslims. Imam Taqiyuddin Sibki rahmahullah writes in Tabqatul Kubra, I quote him, the year 656 was a year afflicted with the greatest tribulations, filled with vice and the worst of crimes being perpetrated upon the most infamous of the powerful, treating of Muslims in every evil and disgraceful manner, and the descent of disbelievers upon them called the Tatars, Mongols. There is no harm in a briefly touching upon the Tatars incident and the report of what Baghdad used to be, so that a deep understanding be achieved and a picture be portrayed. Muslims have shed tears of blood over the passing of time, and historians know for a fact that they have not come across anything of a similar nature which caused such anarchy as if the world was turned upside down. Ibn Kathir Rahmatullah alayh writes in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya in the 13th volume, there has not been a more heinous crime documented in the books of history, more dreadful, more frightening, more scary than it since the establishment of Baghdad, the fall of Baghdad. Imam Yunini Rahmahullah writes in Zail Miratu Zama, Islam has not been afflicted with a catastrophe greater and more repulsive than the fall of Baghdad. I mean, there are many poems which have been written upon, expressing the agony, expressing the pain, expressing, the hard, the hard, you can say, the heartbreak of the fall of Baghdad. The first thing, it was an attack on the deen, that you must remember. The greatest attack a person, country, or nation can be afflicted is an attack on the religion at fundamental. Imam Subki Rahmatullah alayhi says in Tabqatul Kubra, Baghdad was never a place of disbelief. Never has anything occurred of a similar nature to what occurred there since the creation of the world. As for the murder of Khalifa, though in the world worse things occurred, it became the means of the degradation of deen and calamities which affected Muslims on the whole. The deen was affected. It was attack on deen. I will not say deen was affected. It was an attack on the deen. The second thing, if you read the execution of the Khalifa, Khalifa is a very respectful, position in Islam. Irrespective how he is, but the Khalifa used to act as a symbolic figure of religious and diplomatic unity. And you will be astonished to know that how he was killed in this fall of Baghdad. Ibn Kathir Rahmatullah alayhi says in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, the Khalifa stood before Halaku, who asked him about many things. It is narrated that Khalifa began to stutter as he saw the disgrace and tyranny he was being subjected to. Imagine, he is the Khalifa of the Muslims. Halaku is an infidel. Is a disbeliever. He was kept in a tent. Imam Subki Rahmahullah writes in At-Tabqatul Kubra, the Khalifa was kept in a tent. Now just imagine this, how he ridiculed the Khalifa. It's mentioned by, the Hamzani in Jami al-Tariq that on Friday, Halaku entered the city to view the palace of the Khalifa. He sat down. Now, remember this character, Halaku, who? The commander-in-chief, the king, you can say, the governor of Mongols. Halaku entered the city. He is, to view the palace of the Khalifa. He happily sat down and welcomed the leaders. Then he commanded that Khalifa be brought according to Subki. He summoned him at night and asked, you are the host and we are the guests. So why do you not present us with something appropriate? He was trembling with fear, Khalifa. He brought many of the wealth, his locks were broken, 2,000 sets of clothing, 10,000 gold coins, studded gems, number of jewels, but he was not impressed. And Halaku, mocked him saying, the apparent wealth of the world that you possess is well fit for our slaves. This is for our slaves, whatever I have mentioned. However, I am referring to the hidden treasure of you own. What is it? Where is it hidden? Then Khalifa then pointed out the well full of gold in the courtyard of the palace. So they dug the ground and found it filled with real gold. And then he said that, why didn't you give this well to the army? Why did you not bring it? So why did you not bring it before the soldiers on the banks of the Amu Darya, which actually is a river in the Asia? Or why did you send it as a friendly tribute? So he was mocking the Khalifa. Thereafter, he went to the wives of the Khalifa. He said that you have to select this number, rest will be taken by us as slaves. Hamzani actually mentioned, he was, you will be astonished to know that when Khalifa came to him, Halaku said, now we are going to kill him. So one of the ministers of Halaku said, by spilling the blood of this man, you will be oppressing the world. And it will become the means of the destruction of your empire because he's from the progeny of the Prophet, Banu Abbas. He belongs from the family of Prophet. So what did he do, according to one of the ministers, and who was that minister we will be discussing here? He was actually Nasiruddin Tisi, who was a Rafidi Shi. So he said, no, wrap up in a sack, sack, the sack of rice, you might see sacks, haila. Wrap up in a sack, and he was kicked to death. When they're about to kill him, he shouted out cry. He was brutally murdered. Kasir Rahmatullah Ali writes in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, they kicked him to death whilst he was in a sack, so that his blood would not spill onto the ground. They feared being afflicted by the retaliation they were warned of. He was suffocated according to one narration, and drowned according to another. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Imam Ghazali, Imam Zahabi rahmatullah alayhi writes that the Khalifa was massacred towards the end of Muharram, and I believe he was not buried as it was difficult to find someone who dated his death or buried his corpse. Ibn al-Futi writes he was murdered in such a manner that he was placed in sacks and kicked to his death. The location of his groan is still unknown. What happened to the wife and children of the Khalifa? They were taken by Mongols. What happened to the Abbasids in Baghdad? Hamzani writes they killed every single one of the Abbasids with the exception of the very few insignificant ones. Everyone. They came to the relatives of the Khalifa in Saqqara and Darul Shadra. They called them out by one with their children and servants. They were taken to the Qilal graveyard, which was facing the watchtower, where every last one of them was killed. Everyone was killed. No one was. Ibn Kathir rahmatullah alayhi writes in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, men of the Banu Abbas would be called out from the house of the Khalifa together with the children, women, folk. They would take them to the Qilal graveyard, which was facing the watchtower. They would be slaughtered like sheep. These were the words of Ibn Kathir. They were slaughtered like sheep. They would also take girls and slaves captive as they wished. What happened to the elders of Baghdad? Everyone was killed. Even some narrations mentioned that a minar full of skulls of Muslims, minar not made up of stones but made up of skulls of Muslims, was constructed. Now, this was the fall of Baghdad. Muslims were killed in this manner. The massacre began on Monday 5th. They killed, plundered, captured, punished people, multifariously, and looted their wealth with agonizing punishments for a duration of 40 days. They killed men, women, children. Only a handful of people survived from the city's inhabitants and adjoining areas. This was, Imam Subki rahmatullah alayhi says that when Halaku commanded that it should be counted how many people we murdered, almost 18 lakh. It numbered to 18 lakhs. 9 lakh was physically counted, and 9 lakh was an estimate of those who were missed out and those who drowned. So this was the fall of Baghdad, and the list goes on and on and on. You can't even imagine. Some scholars even mentioned a bigger number. Books, the biographies, the libraries of Baghdad. Abu Shama al-Maqdisi rahmatullah alayhi writes in Al-Zail al-Rawzatain, a letter arrived from one of the survivors in Baghdad. And he said, the situation is worse than the news you have received. The situation is worse than the news you have received. And the scholars mentioned the books were dumped into the Tigris River, and due to the large amount, it piled up and became a bridge for people and animals to cross. Imagine. Tigris River is not, a small canal. No, it's a huge river. The books were dumped into the Tigris River due to the large amount. It piled up and became a bridge for people and animals to cross. The water of the Tigris also turned black. This is mentioned in the books of history, Riyadul Masail. Now, this was the fall of Baghdad. Two people were basically responsible for this, Nasiruddin Tusi and Ibn al-Khami. Remember those names. The first character, Nasiruddin Tusi. Who was he? Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Tusi. He was commonly known as Muhaqqiq al-Tusi or Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi. He was born in Tus, a city in Iran. Now he is in Iran. Remember this, right? Now what was his status? First thing, he was in Iran. Remember this. Second thing, what was his status? Hamzani mentions that Halaku became convinced of the truthfulness and sincerity. Who was Halaku? Mongol. The same, tyrant. He was convinced of the truthfulness and sincerity of Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi and showed them with kindness and favors and gifts. He also mentioned that Halaku became apprised of the beauty of his knowledge, so desired that he remains close to him. Halaku went out all in honoring and revering Muhaqqiq al-Tusi. Nasiruddin Tusi became the close confidant and wazir of Halaku. These are the books of, this is not me saying, these are books, this is mentioned from the books of Shia. Qadim al-Mustadrak, Riyad al-Masail, Qadim al-Mustadrak, Tarikh, Mukhtasar al-Duwal. Now, the second thing, That Tusi was who? Tusi was the minister of Halaku. Who was Tusi? Who was Tusi? Was he a Sunni? Not at all. He was the Wazir of Ismailia. He returned a book. He actually published a book on the Isna Ashari Creed, affirming his affiliation with him. Just an example, Hilli mentions in his book, Al-Hur al-Amili, Amal al-Amil, he mentions his book that he mentions وَكَانَ هَذَا الشَّيْخ مُحَقِّقًا وَلَوْ مُصَنِّفًا الْكَثِيرَ على مذهب الإمامية. He says he was a great scholar. Who? A Shia scholar is telling Nasiruddin Tusi was a great scholar. He authored many books on the creed of the Imamiyya. So this states the first thing, Halaku was from Iran. The second thing, he was close to him, Halaku. The third thing, he was a Shia. Hassan Beg Rumlu writes in his book Muqaddimah Jami al-Maqasid that Nasiruddin Tusi, none has adequately advocated the banner of the Jafari creed and the propagation of the true Isna Ashari creed in a manner similar to that of Nasiruddin Tusi. Yeah, So Nasiruddin Tusi was a Shia. This is mentioned in the books of Shia. Now, this is the first thing that you need to remember. Now, Nasiruddin Tusi completed. Let's get to the next character, Muhammad ibn al-Alqami. Who is he? Muayyuddin Abu Talib Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Ali ibn al-Alqami. Now, where was he? Now, pay attention to this. He was in Baghdad, Iraq. He was in Baghdad. Ibn al-Alqami resided by his maternal uncle Adududdin Khummi, who was at that time assigned to supervise the development sector for the Abbasid ruler. He worked under the Banu Abbasiyah. After some time, this position was assigned to Shamsuddin Naqid, and later on the responsibility was bestowed upon Ibn al-Alqami. So Ibn al-Alqami, Muhammad ibn al-Alqami, worked as a minister. He was a wazir for whom? For the Caliph of Baghdad. Now, Caliph trusted him. Muhammad ibn al-Alqami. Remember this very clearly. He trusted him. Al-Mustasim had complete reliance on its wazir Al-Qami. Imam Suyuti rahmatullah alayhi mentions in Tariq al-Khulafa. Now, first point, Al-Qami was from Baghdad. Al-Qami was trusted by whom? By the Caliph. Now, who was Al-Qami? Akhwan Asari mentions in his book Ayan al-Shia, Muayyuddin al-Qami was amongst the seniors of the Shia creed in India. Majlisi mentions he was the leader of the creed, a person of correct beliefs, and may Allah be pleased with him. Lanatullah alayhi. This was mentioned by Majlisi in his book Biharul Anwar. So Muhammad ibn al-Qami was also Shia. These two characters. And still Shia has immense love for him, which is natural. Now, so these are the two characters. Nasiruddin Tusi. The first thing that I would like to mention here regarding Tusi, and it's very interesting that many students should understand this, right? Nasiruddin Tusi, the first thing he says, Nasiruddin Tusi, and this is from the books of Shia and Hamzani. Hamzani says during the attack of the Mongols upon the Ismailis, because Ismailis was in Iran, so Mongols attacked Ismailis as well. He was Isna Ashari. Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi, who was the greatest and most knowledgeable scholar together with a group of others, were forced to remain in the Ismaili territory, although they were fed up by residing with them apostates and despised them. Understand? He used to consider his own fellow men, his own countrymen from the same sect only, Ismailis, as apostates and despised them. Nasiruddin Tusi. They had established deep ties with Halaku. As was always their intent, and they began secretly seeking his counsel in preparation for the reins to fall into hands in the easiest and best manner possible by joining forces with Muslim and foreign mosques. For this reason, this spared no effect in convincing Khurshah to surrender and obey by scaring with him with the consequences of resistance and opposition, which resulted in him accepting their advice. So the fall of Iran was because of Nasiruddin Tusi. This is the first thing. When Halaku Khan, Mirza Nur Tabrisi mentions in Qatima al-Mustadrak, when Halaku Khan approached the Ismaili territory to conquer those cities, the son of King Alauddin emerged from one of the forts by the secret instruction of Nasiruddin Tusi and began serving Halaku Khan. When Halaku conceived that this was by the permission and consultation of Muhaqqir and that he had opened the fort and granted them entry, he granted Muhaqqir. Who granted Muhaqqir? Nasiruddin Halaku granted Muhaqqir great honor and respect. So who is helping Halaku here? Nasiruddin Tusi. Remember this. And these are from the books of Shia, because Shia might deny this. When Halaku became certain of the truthfulness and sincerity of Tusi, so this is from another book, Jami Tarif Hamzani. When Halaku becomes certain of the truthfulness and sincerity of Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi, he showed him with his kindness and favors. He gave him a number of horses to carry his family and close ones. Now, this is love between Halaku, between a Mongol and a Shia. And now, the second thing, which is very important, what was his role in instigating war of Iraq and Baghdad? Right? What was his role? Now, listen to this. Nuri al-Tabrasi, Qatim al-Musaddaqa writes, he entered the fort together with Halaku. Halaku held Muhaqqiq in high esteem by keeping him by his side and orchestrating all matters in according to his opinion and permission. Now, Halaku is listening to whom? Tusi. Muhaqqiq means Tusi, thereby made Halaku desirous to conquer southern Iraq, which resulted in Halaku Khan thereafter conquering Baghdad, subjugating those cities, its surroundings, and annihilating the Abbasid Khalifa. These are the words of whom? Nuri at-Tabrasi. Halaku convinced, Nasiruddin Tusi convinced Halaku to attack Baghdad. It's mentioned in Kalsh Kalfa, Nazmi Zada mentions, which is actually the biography of Qasim Narusim, through the persuasion means convince, to the argument of Nasiruddin Tusi, I'm proceeding towards Baghdad. Now, I will mention you a story here. Try to listen to this. Halaku consulted with the members of the state and the present notables regarding his decision. And this story is mentioned in Jami Tarikh, page number 278 to 280. Listen to this. Halaku, the leader of Mongols, consulted with the members of the state and the present notables regarding his decision to invade Baghdad, and each one of them gave their opinion according to what they believed. He then summoned the astrologer Hasamuddin, who was his companion in the matters of decision making, and said to him, shed light on what is clear to you from the start without any flattery. When he mustered up the courage due to his close proximity, he told the king secretly that he is not happy that he intends to attack the Khilafah and proceed with an army to Baghdad, as every king up to this day who had planned to attack Baghdad and the Abbasids did not enjoy kingship nor life. If you do not believe me and go there, you will face 6 types of issues. Horses will die and the army will get sick. The sun will not rise. There won't be any rain. Violent winds will blow and the land will be destroyed by earthquakes. Plants will not grow in the soil. The main ruler will die this year. Halaku then asked him to testify to the veracity of his words, which the pure man then wrote down. However, the general public and the leaders were of the opinion that proceeding to Baghdad was the correct course of action. Now, I'm stopping here, pausing here for a while. Imagine Halaku calling all his ministers. He used to believe in astrology. So one of the astrologer came. He said, no king, this is not the right thing to do. He mentioned some superstitious belief. And he told, if you think this is right, he warned the astrologer, if you're telling whatever is right, please note it down. So he wrote it down. Now, he's asking the other ministers. And one of those ministers is who? Nasiruddin Tusi. Now listen, what did Nasiruddin Tusi say? Thereafter, Halaku Khan called for Nasiruddin Tusi to consult with. Khaja was afraid. Khaja is Nasiruddin Tusi, thinking it was a test. So he said, none of these things will ever happen. Halaku replied, okay, if it doesn't happen, what Husamuddin is saying, what will happen? Nasiruddin Tusi replied, Halaku will soon replace the Khalifa. Halaku will soon replace the Khalifa. Now, who is encouraging? Nasiruddin Tusi is encouraging Halaku to attack it. Now, this is the one. This clearly shows that Nasiruddin Tusi played an important role in instigating a war against the Muslims. As simple as that. Third thing, he actually facilitated this as well. Halaku, Mirza Muhammad, Mirza Muhammad Nankabani is among the Shia who mentions this matter, that historians have recorded that the astrologer Hisamuddin suggested that Halaku should not take the life of Mustasim, who is Mustasim Khalifa, because he was from the descendants of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and that there was no benefit in his killing, as the earth will shake and the sky will split open upon it. Nasiruddin Tusi refuted this. Nasiruddin Tusi refuted this. Qisasul Ulama. This is from Qisasul Ulama. Mirza Muhammad, who is among the Shia, he mentioned this. Nasiruddin Tusi refuted his suggestion, saying that it was all fallacies. When Halaku became reluctant after hearing the words of Husamuddin, Nasiruddin Tusi advised him to roll Mustasim in a rug and squeeze him slowly so that the repercussions mentioned by the astrologer could be avoided, or else squeeze him until he dies without shedding his blood. Halaku fancied the suggestion of Tusi and ordered that the Khalifa be killed in that manner. This is Nasiruddin Tusi. Now, the libraries of Baghdad. What happened to those books? Who are responsible? Ibn Qayyim Rahmatullah Ali writes in Ighathatul Lahfan. Ibn Qayyim Rahmatullah Ali writes in Ighathatul Lahfan fi Masa'id al-Shaitan. When the matter reached the apostate, Murtad, Ibn Qayyim, yeah, of course he was Murtad. When the matter reached the Murtad, Nasiruddin Tusi, the Wazir of Halaku, he removed himself from the followers of Rasulullah and his religion and presented them to the sword to the extent that he sought only intercession for his own apostate brothers. So the Khalifa, together with the judges and juries, was slain, whereas the philosophers, astrologers, physicists, and sorcerers were spared, and the endowments and affairs of the education institute and masajid were assigned to them. So he stole them, Nasiruddin Tusi. He stole, and he was responsible for the destruction of those books. So this was Nasiruddin Tusi, the role of Nasiruddin Tusi in the fall of Baghdad. Right? So the first thing that I would like to mention regarding Muhammad ibn al-Alqami here is Muhammad ibn al-Alqami and Tusi were friends. This you keep in mind. They used to write letters. Right? Both of them were friends. Halaku, Muhammad ibn al-Alqami writes that Muhammad ibn al-Alqami used to write to Halaku and Tusi, and he spurred them on to exploiting Baghdad as a form of retaliation to the Abbasids. Now he was someone who was cunning. He was from the wuzara, he was from the ministers, but he was not loyal to the king, not loyal to the caliph. Now, statement of Abu Ja'far regarding the Abbasids, where he mentioned the nation will remain fearless in their territory as long as they do not take the life of one of our generality. Is it possible? Now, leave this. There are lots of things that can be discussed here. Now, one thing that I would like to mention here is what Ali ibn Anjab al-Baghdadi says. He says that during the rule of Mu'tasim, the Tatars invaded Baghdad and massacred the Khalifa, which brought the Abbasid rule to an end in the lands of Iraq. This we know. This catastrophe was caused by the minister of the Khalifa, Muhammad ibn al-Alqami, who was a Rafidi. Abdullah Fazl al-Shirazi mentions Ibn al-Alqami secretly sent a messenger to Halaku, demonstrating sincerity and obedience, and suggested a plan which helped in the fall of Baghdad. This was mentioned by Tariq Wasaf al-Hadara and Muhakkama al-Tariq as well. Right? Mullah Baqir Majlisi writes in Biharul Anwar that he was the Wazir of Mustasim, and he was the Wazir who was the last Caliph of the Abbasid dynasty. May the curse of Allah be upon them. This is what Mullah Baqir Majlisi writes. He was a Shia, so he is sending Lana upon the Abbasid Caliphate. He was an admirable Shia. Now see how Shia admire Muhammad al-Alqami. He was an admirable Shia who assisted Halaku Khan in massacring the Khalifa. This is what Shia still says. Biharul Anwar is a very famous book of Shia. And now let me just quote Biharul Anwar, volume number footnote number 1, page number 104. Second edition from Birod, Mu'assat al-Wafa, published in 1983. Now, what I was saying, Muhammad Baqir Majlisi writes that Muhammad al-Alqami was an admirable Shia who assisted Halaku Khan in massacring the Khalifa. He took advantage of the above-mentioned ruler, allowing the Mongol ruler to kill him and destroy the Abbasid rule, who in turn appointed him as a minister. Yes, he was appointed as a minister. After the fall of Baghdad, he was appointed as a minister. This is a fact. right? So Muhammad ibn al-Alqami. I will just mention two things here. This might get lengthy. The first is he reduced the army of Baghdad. Ibn Kathir Rahmatullah alayhi mentions the army of Baghdad was, made and innovated, and its soldiers were less than even 10,000. They were not given stipends, which forced many of them to beg in marketplaces and at the doors of the masajid. The poets even compiled lines of poetry lamenting their plight and mourning Islam and its followers. Imam Subki mentions the wazir. Listen to this very carefully. The Wazir Muhammad ibn al-Alqami exhorted the Khalifa to hold wealth, to stop wealth, preserve wealth, and to reduce the army grants, which then forced the soldiers to seek work. Some began picking up trash while others hid out their houses just they could make ends meet. Okay, because the the king trusted. I'm not telling that king is innocent. He's whatever happened, everyone is responsible for their actions, but the topic is completely different here. So what I'm mentioning here is just understand the role of Muhammad al-Qami. Taqiyuddin Subki writes in Tabaqatul Kubra. So what did the first thing? He reduced the army of Baghdad. He removed the names of those mentioned from the treasury list and banished them from Baghdad. He repeated his action again and again. So what happened? There was a disorder. There was, upset, disappointment in the army, in the Muslim army. This is the first thing that he did by gaining or by cheating the Khalifa. Because he was disloyal, he was loyal to his Shia creed. The second thing, he tricked the Khalifa. Deception. He tricked the Khalifa into coming out to Halaku with the seniors of the state so he could assassinate them. Yununi mentions, at this point, the Wazir ibn al-Khami advised the Khalifa to initiate peace with the king of the Tatars and requested to play an active role in it. He set out confident in himself and soon returned to the Khalifa saying, the king plans on getting his daughter married to the son of the Amir Abu Bakr, thus keeping you as the Khalifa, just as he kept the ruler of Rome. It is possible that you would then be able to do what you please. The Khalifa happily set out, taking a group of his senior associates, and entered his tent. The Wazir then came after inviting the jurists and the likeness to attend what seemed to be a marriage ceremony, but turned out to be the place where their blood was shed. Similarly, group after group were paid to come out. Understand this. So this was the role played by Nasiruddin Tusi and Muhammad ibn al-Alqami in the fall of Baghdad. But still, subhanallah, now that's what Sheikh mentions here. The Sheikh mentions, it's very interesting, that the Sheikh mentions here that Mongols killed Muslims of Baghdad in terms of millions, but still they were unable to cleanse the Muslims from the world. Rather, people from their own community started accepting Islam. And Ibn Athir has a very interesting story on that. Whatever happened to the Muslims of Andalus, similarity of that cannot be shown in the history. When mountains of calamities were being crushed upon the Muslims of Andalus, it was at the same time when Muslims of Balkan were granted extraordinary victories. Secondly, less time passed from Muslims being deported from Andalus, and they again started emerging in Andalus. Spanish people started accepting Islam. Even today, the largest minority of Spain is Muslims. Every person can testify to this fact that today all the polytheistic and the atheistic powers are united against the Muslims. Unfortunately, many of our allies are supporting them. Despite all these efforts, Islam is spreading rapidly. The books in which Islamic civilization is preserved are being published immensely. There is not even a single village in the entire world where the translation of the Quran is absent. This is an undeniable fact that amount of people who are accepting Islam so rapidly, the likes of it are impossible to find. And Shaykh mentions a hadith which was mentioned by Imam Muslim in his Sahih, Imam Dawood in his Sunan, Imam Tirmidhi in his Sunan. The Prophet ﷺ says, and this was reported by Sayyidina Thu'ban radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Inna Allah zawali al-arda, fara'aytu masharikaha wa magharibaha wa inna ummati yablughu mulkuha ma zubiya li minha wa utitul kanzaini al-ahmara wal abyada wa inni sa'altu rabbi li ummati alla yuhlikaha bi sanatin bi'amma wa alla yusallita alayhim aduwwan min siwa anfusihim فيستبها بئرتهم وإن ربي قال يا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم إني إذا خذيت خذاء فإنه لا يرد وإني آتيتك لأمتك ألا خلقهم بسنة بعامة وألا أسلط عليهم عدوا من سوى أنفسهم يستبيه بغضتهم ولو اجتمع عليهم بأخطارها أو قال من بين أخطارها حتى يكون بعضهم يهلك بعضا ويذبي بعضهم بعضا أو كما قال سبحانه وتعالى. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, Allah drew the ends of the world near one another for my sake, the east and the west, and I have seen its eastern and western ends. And the dominion of my ummah would reach those ends which have been drawn near me, and I have been granted the red and the white treasure. And I beg my Lord for my ummah that it should not be. Now, let us stop here. The first thing, now Imam Qurtubi rahmatullah alayh writes in Al-Mufhim lima ashkala min kitab Talqis Muslim, which is a commentary of Abu Abbas Qurtubi rahmatullah alayh, and many scholars of hadith have benefited from this commentary. Ibn Hajar, Imam Nawawi, Al-Mufhim lima ashkala min kitab Talqis al-Muslim. Imam Qurtubi rahmatullah alayh writes, Allah drew the ends of the world near one another for my sake. It means, Alam ta'alam anna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. Al-Fawzan also has the same commentary that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of all things. Now, there is a possibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the entire world. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has removed those materialistic obstacles so that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could see the eastern and the western ends. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was informed the dominion of his ummah that would reach those ends which have been drawn near him. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I have been granted the red and the white treasure. What do you mean by that? The treasure of the Romans and the treasure of the Persians, Khaisar of Kisra. And I beg my Lord for my ummah that it should not be destroyed because of famine, nor be dominated by an enemy, and who is not amongst them to take their lives and destroy them root and branch. And my Lord said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever I make a decision, there is none to change it. I grant you for your ummah that it would not be destroyed by famine, and it would not be dominated by an enemy who would not be amongst it and would take their lives and destroy them root and branch, even if all the people from the different parts of the world join hands together for this purpose. It will not be destroyed. Your ummah will not be destroyed. But it would be from amongst them, that is your ummah, that some people would kill the others or imprison the others. So this is, Sheikh mentions that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the virtues of this ummah is that no authority, no force, no enemy, no army can wipe out this ummah from the face of the earth. So here we stop, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq to implement whatever we are learning on a daily basis. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our knowledge beneficial. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us sincerity while treading upon the path of knowledge. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.